What's up, everybody? Welcome to a thought ramble. This is going to be a two-part thought ramble because in this part I'm looking at the unit entry itself for two units, and then in part two I want to look at the kits for these two units. And the whole idea is how to, you know, breathe some new life into freshening up and kind of updating a little bit the Terminator Squad and the Terminator Assault Squad from the regular Space Marine Codex. It's just a thought ramble exercise type thing, stuff that I've been thinking about for a while now with these two squads. And I have to be honest, Terminators are probably my favorite thing from the Space Marines, and these Terminator squads are just fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not useless to take or anything. You're not making a mistake if you're taking them at all. I really believe they're just fine. Whenever you see them on the table, people are taking notice, trying to deal with them, or seeing where they're going. And I do believe you'll be just fine taking this dependable, consistent squad type Terminators and Assault Terminators. However, they've been the way they are now for a while, and every couple editions of the Codex we get some new stuff in there. So there's a lot of stuff vying for your attention to fill up your army list for whatever point total you're playing. Doesn't matter if you're doing Unbound, formation style with the Strike Force Gladius, or if you're doing a detachment. You have, in theory, every unit vying for your attention in the Codex to fill up your army list. Now, certain playstyles and tactics will dictate what you're going to look at and what you won't, but with all said and done in that regard, the Terminator squads are basically staying at what they've always been at. And when you compare that to shiny new fancy things, it may take some of the luster off of the Terminator squads. And all I'm going to be rambling about in this part is the units themselves, specifically the sergeants, and one little change I think that can be made to kind of bring some of that luster back to the Terminator squads. Not that they're bad, like I said, I just think that a little update can go a long way. And it's just a theory, something that I think GW could do, and if they did, would be pretty cool. Now, this would affect the regular Space Marine Codex, and then in theory it could also affect the Deathwing and the Blood Angel Terminators. Now, the Deathwing are kind of unique because the Deathwing Knights and the Deathwing Command Squads are pretty unique. But I mean, for the Deathwing Terminator Sergeants or the regular Deathwing squads, this could come into effect. This wouldn't really affect Space Wolves because the Space Wolf Terminators are very freeform anyway because they don't follow the Codex Astartes at all. So their entire army is basically freeform in a sense. That's why they have all those different squads. But when you look at the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, and of course the regular Space Marine Codex, they all follow the Codex Astartes to one degree or another. So it can work for all of them, kind of trickle through that way. So, with that said, I really think what made kind of no sense to me from the beginning is how these Terminator Sergeants really have no options for themselves. Yes, the Assault Terminator Sergeant can be Twin Lightning Claw or Thunderhammer Storm Shield, but so can the rest of the squad. It's just part of the squad's gimmick, if you will. It's a good gimmick, but it's still a part of that gimmick. The sergeants themselves have no sergeant options. It's just the way they are. And the fluff reason that I think was also partially invented to help deal with the limitations at the time that these models were first made. But the fluff reason for this is essentially the Codex Astartes dictates exactly how Terminators are to be equipped for certain missions, or for different mission types. So if the Codex Astartes dictates we need Assault Terminators in this role, then you have the Assault Terminators with Twin Lightning Claws or Thunderhammer Storm Shield, or what, or if you need Ranged Terminators, then you have the Ranged Terminator Squad. So I get it, and I think you can still have that fluff stuff in there, but have the sergeants have more leeway and more freedom. Especially considering the Space Marine Codex, the Terminators are not a permanent position, right? The chapters that field Terminators outside of the Dark Angels and their successors field them in a temporary capacity, meaning they only bust out the Terminator armor when they need to. So those same squads will be as Stern Guard or Vanguard when not in Terminator armor. So that very same sergeant can be really customized in terms of being a Stern Guard sergeant, but then when they don Terminator armor, they have very little customization. It just seems, well, really no customization, and it just seems kind of weird to me. So with that said, let's first look at the Assault Terminators. They start off with Twin Lightning Claw, and they can be Thunderhammer, Storm Shield, and that doesn't have to change. But for the Sergeant, it should be a little bit wordier because it should be giving the options to take a bunch of different stuff, kind of how the Vanguard Veteran can take a bunch of different stuff. Basically, I just looked at what the Vanguard Veteran can do for the Assault Terminators Sergeant, and I looked at what the Stern Guard Sergeant can do for the Ranged Terminator Sergeant, and just modified it a little bit. So with the Assault Terminators, there's zero range capability at all. So obviously, any range upgrades the Vanguard Veteran Sergeant could take, the Terminator Assault Sergeant should not be able to take it. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with the Twin Lightning Claw base, and then from there, you can have the Storm Shield listed as its own separate thing, and it can state that the Sergeant may replace one of its Lightning Claws with a Storm Shield. And then you have a separate listing in which the Terminator Sergeant can replace one or both of its Lightning Claws with the following. And you would list Thunderhammer, you'd list Power Weapon, you'd list Power Fist, and you'd list, perhaps in a separate section underneath that, that the Terminator Sergeant may replace a Lightning Claw with a Relic Blade. That way you only can take one Relic Blade. Kind of like how the Vanguard Veteran Sergeant can take a Relic Blade. And I think if you have it listed like that, you would have a really cool potential for the Terminator Sergeant of the Assault Terminators. And I put Power Weapons in there because they're the same point cost essentially when you look at them in the Vanguard Veteran section as a Lightning Claw. So the Power Sword, the Power Maul, the Power Axe, all being lumped together as Power Weapon, could be a free upgrade for the Sergeant. And maybe you want a Power Axe for whatever reason, you know, comboing with your one Lightning Claw that's left over, or maybe you want a Power Maul and a Storm Shield. Maybe instead of Thunderhammer Storm Shield, you want Relic Blade Storm Shield, or you just want a Storm Shield with your Lightning Claw. Maybe you want two Thunderhammers, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of combinations that can happen there, and I think in doing so, you give just a little bit more toolbox capability to that Assault Terminator squad. It's nothing crazy OP and overtly ridiculous or strong, but it's definitely something that can be A, fun, B, stylish, and C, a bit more utility added to the squad. And when you think about it, these sergeants are elites of the elite, essentially, right? Because the first company is all the elite and veterans of the chapter. The sergeants of the first company are just that much more elite and veteran because they're leading other veterans. They're basically in line potentially to become a new captain when one needs to be replaced for whatever reason. So they should have a bit more versatility going on, especially, well, specifically for their Terminator versions of themselves. So that's the Assault Terminator Sergeant. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. For the Ranged Terminator Sergeant, I think firstly what we got to look at is starting equipment, because the starting equipment for the Terminator Sergeant of a ranged squad is Stormbolter, and it specifically calls out Power Sword. Now, specifically calling out the Power Sword, I think, is the big problem there, especially considering for a few editions now, we've had different stat lines for Power Sword, Power Maul, and Power Axe. So I think just a one-word change from Power Sword to Power Weapon for starting equipment already opens up a bit of a toolbox situation for the Terminator Sergeant. Because, yeah, it's the ranged Terminator squad, but they're not terrible in close combat, especially if you're going to start punching tanks in the face. One thing the Sergeant can't do to help his squad out is punch things in the face if they're a vehicle. So, a Power Maul, if you're going to be doing that, could be an attractive option. It's not a Power Fist at all, I know, but it does give him higher strength and lets him at least lend, potentially, depending upon what vehicle you're punching in the face, it'll let him lend his attacks to it as well. That's just one example. Um, from there, we can look at sergeant-specific upgrades. So this is where we look at stern guard. Now, we might want to leave out pistols if, let's say, GW doesn't want pistols on the Terminators, for the Terminator squad stuff. Okay, fine. So the Terminator Sergeant cannot take any pistols. What you would do is you'd have it listed that Terminator Sergeant may replace his Stormbolter with a combi weapon. So that should be something that the Terminator Sergeant can do. And then you could have in a separate column, the Terminator Sergeant may replace his power weapon with one of the following. And you would list a Lightning Claw, a Power Fist, and a Thunder Hammer. And it's close enough to what the Stern Guard Sergeant can take, except I added a Thunder Hammer. And that's it. Very simple, very efficient. This could be another thing that opens up the bit of a toolbox situation with that squad. So now if you really want Power Fists everywhere, you can spend the extra points to give your sergeant a Power Fist. And then that can synergize with the entry in the codex already that states any model equipped with a Power Fist may take a Chain Fist. So if you wanted to get to a Chain Fist with your sergeant, you could. Now, on top of that, this would let you have a Lightning Claw. This would let you have a Thunder Hammer, which I think is just all sorts of cool and fitting, especially thematically if you're playing Salamanders, for example. So if you want to spend extra points, you can give your Terminator Sergeant a Combi Melter or Flamer, and a Thunder Hammer, and be very Salamanders-y. If you're trying to go with a chapter weapon type, like for example Dark Angels, when you see them represented, is almost always with a power sword, almost always. So there are some chapters out there where the axe is their symbol, and the axe is what the chapter uses. For the most part, by and large, most of the chapter utilizes an axe. Well, now you would have the capability, by calling the power sword a power weapon instead, to have it start off with an axe. So you can just keep it with the axe if you want it, thematically, or because you want the capabilities of the axe, and then you can give it a combi weapon to go along with it if you wanted to. Or you can keep the Stormbolter and then give it a Lightning Claw instead, just for a little bit extra capability in close combat. It just again opens up that toolbox situation, I feel. So that's really it. Very simple, very straightforward. Just give the sergeants more options, and I think you freshen up, breathe some new life into these two Terminator squads, which are already solid choices, like I said in the beginning. But I think just giving some options there, letting the player have some customization potential, and have it actually mean something on their Terminators, will be pretty cool. So in part 2, I'm going to go over the kits, because the kits are pretty old and need an update as well. I think they need an update regardless of what happens to the actual units. So I'm going to go over that, and some things that I think they could do if they were to do something similar to this whole Sergeant being more customizable shenanigans. So anyway, thanks for sticking through it. Again, this is just a thought ramble thing, a little thought experiment ramble. So feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. Do you have a different idea? Do you think this is dumb? Do you think it would be a cool idea? Post it in the comments section. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for sticking through it, and until next time, take it easy.